Well, folks, I think we're going to get started. Good evening, welcome. My name is Josh Owen. I am the Vignelli Distinguished Professor of Design and Director of the Vignelli Center for Design Studies. Tonight marks the first lecture of the 22-23 academic year and our Fall 22 Vignelli Design Conversations series presented by Design Milk and RIT's Magic Center, made possible in part by the generosity of RIT alumnus Chris Bailey and Bailey Brand Consulting. I'd like to begin by offering my gratitude to RIT's Magic Center and their remarkable team of faculty, staff, and students for a successful collaboration on the lecture series to come this year. I'd also like to extend a special thanks to Caroline Williamson, the new editorial director of Design Milk, for continuing our partnership. And thank you to our interpreters this evening, Justin Anderson and Sarah Brewer, for their work. Rochester Institute of Technology's Vignelli Center for Design Studies is an international hub for education, research, collaboration, and advocacy, which expands the scope of the programs in the College of Art and Design's School of Design. The facility houses the archive of renowned designers Lella and Massimo Vignelli, whose works are icons of international design. The center and archive sit within RIT's College of Art and Design, which was built on the traditional territory of the Onondaga, or the people of the Great Hill. In English, they are known as Seneca people, the keepers of the Western Door. They are one of 6 sovereign nations that make up the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We honor the land on which RIT was built and recognize the unique relationship that the indigenous stewards have with this land. That relationship is the core of their traditions, cultures, and histories. We recognize the history of genocide, colonization, and assimilation of indigenous people that took place on this land. Mindful of these histories, we work towards understanding, acknowledging, and ultimately reconciling. As stewards of history and content, we must acknowledge and seek to learn from our context, bad and good, ugly and beautiful. This applies to the Vignelli Center as with any archive. The Vignellis taught us that design is a systematic framework for solving the world's most intractable problems. If recent times have taught us anything, it's that while we as humans are adaptable, our societies and systems have significant flaws. We're at a point when we need to have difficult discussions and work to create a new balance in the world. In this, design must play a critical role. As the director, I aim to make the Vignelli Center even more accessible and applicable by bringing in stimulating guest contributors from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds who help us to consider design in innovative ways. The Vignelli's Design is One philosophy leaves us with a universal message that design is a lens through which we can envision a more inclusive and sustainable tomorrow. This evening, we are delighted to welcome Kathy Brew, an award-winning video maker whose work includes documentaries, experimental work, and public television productions. Design is One, Lella and Massimo Vignelli, on the acclaimed designers, has been featured internationally at festivals and other venues. A much earlier work, Mixed Messages, examines gender stereotyping in popular culture and recently screened at the 2020 International Film Festival Rotterdam and the 2021 Lausanne Underground Film and Video Festival. Brew is a Fulbright Scholar in 2018 and spent 4 months in Peru, where she worked on editing Following the Thread, a short film about indigenous weaving communities, along with a portfolio of photographs. The film has been finalized with Andean sensitive music composed by Peruvian artist Pauchi Sasaki and is being distributed by Documentary Educational Resources. She teaches a course entitled Audio Biography of Place in the MFA Art Practice Department at the School of Visual Arts in New York City. It is appropriate that we begin this year's Vignelli Design Conversations lecture series with Kathy and her film, followed by a panel discussion, as it allows us to reflect on the Vignelli's contribution to RIT and to the world. Thank you, Kathy, for helping to tell their impactful story and for sharing it with us tonight. Please join me in a warm Vignelli Center welcome for Kathy Brew, who I'll invite up to introduce her film.
Thank you, Josh, and it's an honor to be here. I was last here when the Vignelli Center kicked off its opening, its ribbon cutting, which was in 2010. So it's amazing to be in this kind of facility to show this film on a screen like this. And when we were in here before you all arrived, it was just so impressive to see it projected large and the sound quality. It's a real honor and privilege to be here, and it was a real honor and privilege to meet and work with the Vignellis, with my partner of 17 years, Roberto Guerra. And we'll get into this more with the conversation. I don't want to take up too much time right now, but the origin of this film really came because Roberto, originally from Peru, was a filmmaker. He had been an electromechanical engineer in university and corrupted himself to filmmaking, 16 millimeter filmmaking back then. And he knew in Peru he wasn't probably going to really be able to make films. And so he was kind of a shy man on some levels, but he took himself to New York and he introduced himself to the verite pioneer documentary filmmakers, Albert Maysles, Ricky Leacock, Robert Drew, and I'm forgetting, Penny Baker. Anyway, long story short, he ended up living in Europe with his first partner of many years. And he corrupted her to filmmaking. She had been a painter and had studied with Oskar Kokoschka. And in fact, their very first film was on him. And they made an amazing film on Henri Langlois, the founder of the Cinémathèque Française, which for those of you who are interested in film history is a really interesting film that was made in 1970. But when this center was being under discussion and the archive was coming here to RIT, when Roger Remington, who's going to be with us on the discussion afterwards, was in the same position that Josh is in now. Lady Hamlin, who was very instrumental in initiating getting this project off the ground, I think said something to the Vignellis, well, there should be a film about them. And then the Vignellis said, well, we should go to Roberto because he made a film about us many years ago. Back in Europe, when he was making 16 millimeter films, he and his partner, Isla Hirschhahn, made a 6-part series called By Design that included a profile on Milton Glaser, Richard Sapper, Karl Lagerfeld, Ben and Jane Thompson, Lella and Massimo Vignelli, and I'm spacing out the 6th person at the moment, but that was done in 16 millimeter. Just a little bit more background on this film. Initially, it was really going to just be this interview with the Vignellis and Roger Remington, who we're so lucky to have in the room tonight. So when you see the film, you'll realize that there's this core interview that was really the initial impetus, and that's all it was going to be. But after we did that interview, Roberto and I became convinced from his previous film to now was such a big contrast in both how you make films and what more work they had already done since that film, that we needed to make a full-blown feature documentary on it. And so that's what you're going to see tonight. It's evergreen, the fact that they're not here anymore. It's a way you can still meet them and hear about the importance of their design legacy, which, as you'll see in the closing credits, as Peter Eisenman says, will this matter 100 years from now? Yes, and that's what's important. So enjoy the film and stick around if you can for a little chat with all of us afterwards. Thank you.
Next to Marion, we have R. Roger Remington, the Vignelli Distinguished Professor of Design Emeritus here at RIT, and the first and inaugural director of the Vignelli Center for Design Studies. And next to Roger is Shanti Thakur, who is a filmmaker, professor, and director of the School of Film and Animation at RIT. And we're delighted to have them all here because each of them have a specific role to play in the conversation around the film. So I'd like to start by seeing if we have any questions in the audience.
Don't be shy.
Please. Anyone want to start, or are you going to leave it to me?
Okay, there's one back there.
Just curious, because there's a lot of people I'm assuming you interviewed, there's a lot of perspectives you could take. When you were putting together the film and thinking about the content and the story that you wanted to put together, did it emerge from the interviews and meeting all of these people, or did you have a vision that you were trying to capture?
Well, we were trying to capture the Vignellis and the breadth of their work, but I think the way I make documentaries, some people have a script, but as Roberto would say, if you want to make the gods laugh, tell them your plans. I mean, documentaries are about being there and letting the material inform you as you go along. So, you know, we had transcripts of every interview. So we started to do a lot of, you know, paper editing first and then assemblies. And just as the Vignellis said about design, the distillation, taking away, that's part of it. But we just knew that we wanted to cover the breadth of their practice and all the, as Massimo says, from the spoon to the city. But we wanted to have the influence that they had with some of these other people because we had the opportunity to get to many of them right there in New York. So it was more of an unfolding. And the challenge partly was the fact that we didn't have a lot of process of their work because most of it had already been created, even though they were still doing things. So to have a narrative arc, the beauty of including Rochester in that development from the groundbreaking and then the actually opening of the center, the fact that we could just go and hang out with them. And I mean, you know, the flower scene, it's like I live in the flower district. It's let's bring them some flowers today and oh, let's film them, putting them in the vase. And Michelle Ogadona towards the end, she was there and it's like, I'm gonna come and work with you tomorrow. It's like, oh, can we come back with a camera? I mean, so we just got them telling us about the various projects and getting to get behind the making of. And then a few scenes we did have like the changing of the architectural plan in St. Peter's. It was like, well, can we go film that? And it was, again, such a pleasure to really be in their world for that kind of time. And, you know, the cooking scene, you know, just some of the spontaneity of bringing their humanity and their lives and how they live their design.
Great. Do we have any other questions? Yeah.
So I want to ask a question about art and design. So on the movie it mentioned like there's a difference between art and design. Sorry, could you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a difference between art and design. Said in the movie said okay, so art is not comparable. It's not like the design is more focused on how to create some products comfortable or like help people to use it.
Right.
Yeah, but so in the movie said art is not design, but there's a cup in the movie like it have a curve on the hold. It have a curve on the hold, so that if you give too many water, it will flow out from the curve. So I don't think this is a very comfortable thing for people to use it, but it looks beautiful, but it's not comfortable to use. So like in this case, I'm thinking about like maybe this product is more close to art, but not a comfortable design. So I'm still very confused about the difference between art and design. It seems like when I watch a movie, I found like so many products, they like it's a design but also good art, or it's art and also good design. Like I don't think they are so different with each other.
Well, I think Massimo tries to make the distinction about design is tending, and these designers here could speak to it more than me, but the functionality, the usability, you don't have to have that with art. I mean, I think good design can be artful, but they were trying to make that distinction, and yet, as Lella explained too, they were also influenced by art. And if you're up in the design center and see, there's like one image of Trisha Brown, the choreographer, John Cage, the artist, and Robert Rauschenberg, the artist, something that they designed. So they had an interdisciplinarity of their perspective because they were so knowledgeable.
I'd like to actually take the opportunity to turn your question, which is quite general on the intersection or the challenges and differences between art and design, and direct it to Professor Digel. She recently produced a product with her students, or a project with her students, which used the Vignellis' work, their archive, as a jumping off point for exploring kind of future ideas for design. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the question that was asked.
Well, that question that you just asked, I think is one of the most difficult questions at all, and we always seem to be answering it again and again. And I think the example that you gave with the cup is a very good one, because there is this fluidity between the two, and of course the influence was there, and there's an interdisciplinary work between artists and designers. However, I think when we try to get to the essence of product, and Massimo was also talking about this, that it has to have meaning, and that's where it comes together. When it's the thing that is, when all the functions work, and then it's also about the semantics of the product. It's also about what does it speak to you, and the aesthetics, and I think it's a balance that you have to find as a designer. And of course, Massimo, he was always putting it in such easy and simple language, what was actually very complex. He once said to us, "Oh, we love complexities, but we hate complications." And but the questions for designers are getting more and more complex nowadays, and I think it's not so easy to distinguish anymore. And I think my students, they were very grateful for that the Vignellis offer criteria for good design in their ethos, when they say there's order, there's simplicity, there's to reduce it to the essence that's left, the characteristic that we're searching for. And actually that was something that my students really appreciated in that project. And I think you can tell, I will show on Monday some of the results, you can also tell that they really tried to get down to these simplistic order and in the products that they made.
Thank you. Another question from Joyce Hertzen.
Hi, okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Given what's been going on in the country, I don't want to get into politics, but it speaks to gender and relationships. There are parts in the film, and so, Kathy, I'm going to ask, how you found this in dealing with them, but there are parts in the film where Massimo says, she always accuses me that I don't let her speak. And when Michelle Opadona was here, and she did a wonderful Design Conversations lecture, but she also talks about Massimo having to come around to making sure that Lella got her due, because it was always a very difficult thing. So I'm wondering, Kathy, and it was something that hit me while I was watching the film, because there are times when he's talking and then you jump to Lella and then go back to him. Did you find that you had to intentionally steer the camera to Lella to make sure that she had as much participation in the film?
Well, I think we wanted, how many of you have ever heard of the Guerrilla Girls?
Oh, yeah.
An art world phenomenon where they would raise attention to the lack of female participation in museum exhibitions, galleries, etc., the amount of money a woman would make versus, I'm a feminist, I'm a woman maker myself, so I think we were just very conscious that it was a collaboration, that she didn't get her due. I mean, Peter Eisenman says it, Jeffrey Osborne says it, she spoke about it herself, and that was an important element that I was very strongly conscious of wanting to tease out. Whether we had to intentionally go there, I mean, what we did do is have the separate chats with them about the projects that they did, like Lella did the jewelry, she did the silver stuff, so we wanted that division and yet then their unity and their collaboration to come through. But yeah, that was a conscious choice. But in that sort of core interview, that was, I think, just capturing spontaneously who was speaking when and trying to get them, because that was the interview that Roger did with them, the initial core interview.
I was going to say, I wonder if we could explore that a little bit deeper with Roger's experience with Lella and Massimo.
This was a real challenge because Massimo, for I think all of his career, really dominated the public presence of the two of them. I remember sitting at Syracuse University. They were speaking to the students, and it was supposed to be a lecture by Massimo and Lella Vignelli. Well, Massimo was on the stage and Lella was in the audience with me. And Massimo did the whole speech, and I remember all the way through the talk, Lella kept knocking me on the side because she was really angry at not being properly recognized. Well, when we were working on the film, and I was interviewing them, the interview took place, as you remember, they were both on a black couch there with books in the background. And I was bound and determined before we did the interview that I was going to try to have it be that Lella would be equal with Massimo. And I think there's some very interesting spots in the interview where he does talk over her. I think there's one in particular. But I think I'm not sure I was very successful in what I tried to do at that interview. But I think that Roberto, in the editing and in the other interviews that were done, he was able to equalize the presence of Lella.
Right, but she often, even in that interview, she would speak over him back, sort of talking back to him. And if you remember it, when they were giving the presentation to the RIT class, and she talked about she liked doing the jewelry because she could do it by herself. And at a certain point when he was acknowledging we've been together for 51 years and a life and work partnership, and it's kind of under, but I don't know if you caught that she says, I survived. So, again, it was a, we heard it from other people too. I mean, they did butt heads some, but they had a great, collaboration as well. But it was recognized that she didn't get her due for as much. And Massimo, in fact, after the film was made, he intentionally did a book just devoted to Lella. That's probably
which is available on our website.
Right. So he was conscious of it himself, and I mean even at the groundbreaking, she says I never let her talk, so he let her go first. I think as time went on, he became more aware that they needed to have equal credit.
I'm interested, Kathy, in how the Vignellis felt about the film.
I think they were quite pleased with it. It premiered at the Architecture and Design Film Festival as the opening night film in New York in October of 2012. My sales agent colleague friend said, oh, you gave your world premiere away to a little film festival because, it's not Sundance or Berlin. And we almost got into Tribeca, but I was just as glad that we didn't, because Tribeca is kind of Hollywood on the Hudson, and nothing against that, but the documentaries kind of get lost in it. And when we were asked to do it, we said yes. And the good part was we didn't get a review, but we got a great preview article about the Vignellis that was in the New York Times. It was great. Then we did get a distributor, and a year later we had a 2-week theatrical run at the IFC Theater in New York, and we did get the New York Times review then. So I often tell that to my students too. Sometimes the niche that is sort of like a particular audience is better than going, shooting for the moon and getting lost in the shuffle or something. But I believe they were quite happy with it. They were both there at the opening, and then they were both there at the IFC. Lella was already in her declining dementia, so she was in the audience, but Massimo loved the Q&As with the audience there, and there were some people that were coming, one man was coming back with a notebook like 2 or 3 times in the course of the week, because he said he was like learning so much from the material.
That's great. Switching gears just a little bit, I invited Professor and Director Thakur into the mix because of her unique perspective. She's not coming from the design world, but coming from the film world. So I wonder if you had any thoughts or even questions for Kathy about the nature of the film that you could express.
Yeah, I mean, it was, you had such wonderful subjects to make a film on. They're sort of a filmmaker's dream. They're very eloquent, they're charming, they complement each other so well. The question I had was, you started by bringing up how the genesis of the project. I'm curious what kind of agreement was made with your subjects in terms of the content. Because like, how many hours of footage did you have? What did they want to see? Did they say they wanted to see any rough footage, or a rough cut, or a fine cut?
We didn't have quite that kind of dynamic. I think when you're making a film about subjects who are alive, you do want them to have seen it before you release it. I mean, that's at least my feeling. I think they were pleased. I mean, but they didn't give us any stipulation like we've got to have final say before you release it, or anything like that. And then all the other subjects, they signed releases, and they knew it was to get the work of the Vignellis out in the world. But there was no strict anything, except that just the idea was, and I think they had this added trust because of the previous film with Roberto and this history that they had. And we're kind of soul catchers, so we're not like the industrial production team coming in. We're artists and filmmakers, and have a sensitivity. And I mean, even when we'd be interviewing some of the subjects, a few people are like, oh, what are the questions you're going to ask? And it's like, we're just going to have a conversation. I mean, I never give people questions in advance. You want the spontaneity, and a lot ends up on the cutting room floor. I can't tell you how many hours we've ultimately had, but a lot. And that's one thing that's also very nice here, is that all of the footage we shot is here in the Vignelli archives. So if you wanted to go in here eventually, I don't know if it's digitized or what status it's in, but you could go and hear a whole hour of Peter Eisenman, or when you make films, a lot more gets shot than what ends up in a documentary. I will say that the DVD, I know DVDs are now kind of obsolete, but the DVD did have bonus extras of some other projects that didn't make it into the film, specific things only with Massimo or only with Lella.
I wanted to ask you a follow-up to that. So since you brought up the, let's say, the B-roll that we have in the archives, I'm curious, would you be interested to see students looking through that content and perhaps doing something with it?
Sure.
It's a good answer.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's here for the same purpose that all of the other material is here for. It's a resource.
You heard that, right?
I did.
Make little filmlets. They don't have to be feature length anymore. I'm more interested in shorter things myself.
I have questions to you, Kathy. What about the aesthetics of the film? How did the Vignelli's aesthetics influence the aesthetics of the film?
Well, that was the big challenge, and a big, pressure, I think, that we felt, is to honor their aesthetic in our own film presentation of them. And it was also true for just, the graphics for the title, and the designer who did the website felt the same way. So yes, it was a huge challenge to come to a level of quality and standard that was, parallel to them. And so the interstitials became something. The different elements was a way to sort of thread between things. The music, we had initially, we showed a cut in progress at the, I guess it was maybe the groundbreaking. And we had asked Massimo, what kind of music do you like? And he was like, well, I like Steve Reich's music. Does anybody know of Steve Reich? He's a sort of eminence grise, more new music composer. I think he's 80 years old himself now, but really interesting minimalist composer. And so we actually cut the work in progress to some of his music. And then it became quite clear if we were really going to release this film, that the rights to that music were going to be a little bit too pricey. So this is something else I often tell my students when I've taught in media classes, that if you can, get someone to compose the music for your film, you're much better off. There are also some free music sites. I don't know, Moby apparently even offers free music to students or nonprofit projects, not commercial projects, on his website, or a special thing. But so we got this Japanese Peruvian composer who we had become aware of and befriended, who is based in Lima, but she went to Mills College for her master's, and subsequently, I'm proud to say we got her way before she was where she is now. She was nominated to have a Rolex Foundation Fellowship as with Philip Glass as her mentor. And so she had composed the music for us, and we did that long distance with her in Peru, and she was, okay, let's do a little Lella theme here, and this is a Massimo theme, and she did come to New York for some other reasons, and we did a little bit of recording in a nonprofit studio for some of it, but some of it she did on her own, and I feel very lucky we had that music with it. I think it worked very nicely with the project.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Yeah.
Hi, so throughout the film we have seen that Massimo seems to have a really strong opinions on what he likes and what he doesn't like. He has set tools, set ingredients that he always uses in a new way. And he also showed his book cover design where he compares, like, they were 50 years apart and they were still the same in their essence. So he had a very strong opinion on what he liked. Did that ever interfere with the production of the film?
No. It didn't. Yeah, I mean, he had strong opinions of things, but no, that didn't get into the way at all.
Shanti, were you
Shanti,
gonna?
you did.
Yeah, I was curious that I always love to hear how when there are co-directors working together, how do they collaborate? And so I'm wondering how you and Roberto work together on this film.
Yeah, well, that was interesting, and a lot of people have commented, because we were life and work partners for 17 years. So collaborators making a film about collaborators. I wouldn't say, he was the pencil and I was the criticism, but he was a cinematographer. He started with 16 millimeter, and I corrupted him to video, because I came into media making from video. Actually, the most primitive AV form first, educational film strips, which you're all too young to know about. But I tell my students a tool is just a tool. But so Roberto was the cinematographer. I was kind of the producer with setting up, all the organizing, setting up the interviews, sort of the scheduling. We both do rough cutting, and I'm probably better a little bit at like the structure, and Roberto is definitely better as the technical, bells and whistles. But we were really kind of the mom and pop shop, and we really just went outside for color correction, sound mix, and output kind of things. So it was a very good symbiotic, complementarity kind of dynamic.
It's been 10 years now since we did this, and so it's very interesting to look back on it. And it's interesting, Kathy, to hear you speak about your working relationship with Roberto. I found him to be a fascinating person. He was very quiet, very professional, um, and really focused on what he was trying to do. And I think one of the most powerful memories I have of the whole thing, I guess I would characterize it as kind of a meeting of I thought it was a very intuitive process. The whole thing was very intuitive between the Vignellis and between you and Umberto. And because you had so much content and so much talent and so much technical capability, it couldn't help but work.
Yeah, well, and in fact, I mean, really, and again, I've worked in public television before I was with Roberto. I've worked with many other people who are cinematographers, DPs, whatever you want to call them. I mean, he was so intuitive, and I think the fact that he started in 16 millimeter, he almost was editing in camera because he had that economy of means. Because when you shot on 16 millimeter film, it was like a $3,000 idea to just go start editing versus what it is when we were shooting on mini DV tapes, you know, HD. But like that scene in the kitchen when there's the pasta, and the fact that he could get, with like a quick swish pan, he could get that dynamic that was going on between them. That, you know, with a one camera shoot, with nothing scripted, baby. You gotta just be so attentive and capture what's there, be so present. And he really did have that. It was quite amazing.
And he captured that wonderful gesture by Lella.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, but to just, I mean, what did he have, like, you know, X-ray vision or something? No, I mean, he just was so, it was like dancing with the camera.
I saw a few others, examples like that of that gesture.
Yes, I'm sure he did.
That's in the archives, Rob?
This archive. But, you know, getting back to the point before about the footage that's in the archive, I guess it would be the outtakes of the designer interviews. I think that material needs to be archivally processed before anybody can do anything with it.
Oh, definitely, yes. Yeah, that's for sure.
Oh,
But
did
it
you
is
have-
there, and hopefully that will come with time. There's a question.
No, it wasn't a question.
No,
Oh, I'm
this-
sorry.
We have a student question here, yeah?
Was, when you filmed like the groundbreaking of the Vignelli Center, was filming the opening of the Vignelli Center like always in the vision, or did that kind of come into play later, and like
Again,
waiting for that?
I think we knew, and because, you know, like, as you can tell, this took time. This wasn't like, you know, 6-month project. But because we thought it was worth having that narrative arc, that we kind of did envision that not just the groundbreaking, but the actual opening would be sort of like the final grand finale chop that did lead us to some, and Massimo's birthday party. We actually were out of the country then, but we had a friend who filmed that. But, you know, just things that brought it back down to, you know, a bit of an arc and a bit of a story within the context of showing their canon and all of their different projects.
I'm not sure if you mentioned it earlier or not. Can you let the group know the entire arc of the filming, from what year to what year?
Okay, we started the interviews in 2007, and I guess we finished filming. I'm not sure, we might have done a little bit more filming with them after the opening of the center. I can't remember right now. But, and then, you know, we released the film as the opening for the Architecture and Design Festival 10 years ago in October, so 2012. And then we had the theatrical release the following year in 2013. And at that point, the sad part was that Roberto was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he wasn't able to attend the theatrical release. But and then a few months later, he passed away. But so to me, the beauty is that this film, you know, I'm the only one left standing from the project except for Pauchi Sasaki. But no, and actually some of the subjects. I mean, Alan Heller has now passed away. Jeffrey Osborne has passed away. I think I heard that the man with Rizzoli is also no longer with us. So, but that doesn't matter. It's not about like a current event thing, and that's where I feel very proud that I think the film really does still hold up. It's a way you get to meet them, and it's the only way you get to meet them now. And you hear their philosophy and their design canon, and you see the projects, and you hear how they had this influence, and it still is.
That may be a good way to take us to a close, because I know people will want to get to their dinner plates soon. But I do want to, we'll start by thanking all the panelists for your contributions here, for being here and being connected to the Vignellis and to Kathy for the film. In closing, it's such a great gift to us to have this film. I have played it every year for the students that I teach in industrial design, whose project each year is to be inspired by the Vignellis' work to develop new content. And I wanted to tell you, I'm not sure if I've mentioned this to you yet, that during the initial part of the pandemic, when I played the video to my class, and they were all sitting masked and distanced watching it, I snapped a picture, as I often would do, but when I posted it on social media, I realized that because the world had changed and because we were no longer thinking about students sitting in front of flat screens watching movies, it looked in this photo as if Lella and Massimo were zooming in to the students. And it took me aback for a minute, because I realized that's just what your film has enabled us to do. So thank you for that.
It's been interesting for me to see the film after 10 years. And you know, Massimo always stressed, and you recall in the video, he talked several times about timelessness, and that their work should be timeless. And I think in a way the video is timeless. I know it doesn't feel at all as though it could have been done yesterday.
No, and that's why I call it evergreen. I
Yeah.
think it is, and that I'm very proud that it can stand the test of time and still introduce new people to their work. Because the irony is, it's as the curator at MoMA says, everybody knows the Vignellis, even if you don't know you know them, because you know something they've done, but they just don't have the same, exposure as, star celebrity type people that they deserve. And anyway, thank you all for coming, and thank you to Josh and RIT for having me up here to kick off your fall semester with these open studios, and spread the word. There is such a resource upstairs. I want to just tell you all today, Marion and I connected and had lunch, and I learned one project I had no idea about, that Lella was designing, project never got done, dolls. A young girl, for young girls to become women, and they were all like role models of women who were an astronaut, an artist, a lawyer, a judge, a president. And the physical dolls are in their packaging prototypes, and then there's paperwork and letters about what they were trying to do, and it's just, there's such a wealth here for those of you who are in design.
Thanks for the plug, Kathy. And I'll plug further by saying we just initiated our first open house. So for those of you who are not aware of this, the past 2 days we've had an open house in the Vignelli Center where you can see some of the treasures in the archives curated by our amazing archivist, Jennifer Whitlock. Tomorrow is the last day of our first open house, but we have 2 more this semester and 3 more next semester. So we hope to see more of you exploring the treasures.
And I just want to shift to the film aspect of this place, because this setup, this screen, this projection, this sound is spectacular. So you have an amazing resource here, and I can't wait to learn more about what's going on in the film side of RIT. So anyway, you're in a pretty amazing place.
All right, thank you everyone.